Hi everyone, my name is Wasim and I'm here to present the first in a series of live stream videos, lectures and discussions from the MIT Digital Currency Initiative. So we're a research group that's based at the MIT Media Lab, and I'm going to take the time on this first of this new series to go around and introduce our colleagues and our fellow team members. So we're going to start by handing off to Neha, our director. Neha, can you hear me?
Yep. Hi. Great. Thank you, Wasim. Hi, everyone. This is our first time doing this. So please work with us as we kind of get through all of this. So it's my job to tell you about the DCI, the Digital Currency Initiative. We were founded in 2015, and the origin story is pretty interesting. It actually sort of kind of came out of the demise of what was then called the Bitcoin Foundation. So at the time, there were 3 developers who were working on open source software at the Bitcoin Foundation who were out of a job. And luckily, MIT was able to step in and was able to hire them and formed what is now the Digital Currency Initiative around that. So these 3 developers spent all their time working on Bitcoin. 2 of them are still with us today, Vladimir Vanderlaan and Corey Fields. They still work on Bitcoin. Unfortunately, neither of them were able to join us for this live stream, but hopefully we'll have them on at another time. There will be many more of these. And what we do at MIT is we do research and we convene and we teach classes and we educate. So a couple of examples of those types of things. The things we try to do are work on some of the sort of fundamental problems that still remain in the cryptocurrency space. Scalability, privacy, security are sort of the main things. We collaborate with people across MIT from Sloan, the economics department, and the computer science school. Which is really great. And we love working with students and faculty and researchers from all those different places. We also teach classes. So if you check out our website at dci.mit.edu, you can go look at some of the classes we've taught. We've tried to film all of them. So you'll see things like cryptocurrency engineering and design, which Taj and I taught together. And that's also posted on OCW. You'll see links to a class at Sloan called Blockchain and Money. And you'll see a little bit about some of our lab classes that we've taught too. And even a class on ethics. So we even taught a class called Blockchain Ethics, where we tried to look at some of the design choices that people were making as they were building this software to think a little bit more critically about it. So that to start. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go through, everybody's going to tell you what they do, and that hopefully will give you an idea of everything that is going on at the DCI. So let's get started.
So thanks, Neha. So I'll coordinate a bit as we hop between our colleagues. And so first up is Gertjaap. Gertjaap, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Hi, everyone. So my name is Gertjaap. I'm a software developer. My background is in computer science. I started working with the DCI in April of 2018. I've been a software developer for around 20 years. I started working in cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology around 2017. I started being really interested in specializing in that field, and that led to me working with the DCI. When I started at the DCI, I was working on layer 2 protocols like the Lightning Network. I worked on discrete log contracts. And currently, I'm working on a project called Pool Detective, which is an interesting project that looks into the behavior of mining pools on Bitcoin and various other cryptocurrencies. And we're actually going to do a live stream specific on that topic in one of the next episodes. So that's interesting to watch for. Yeah, that's it for me. So back to you, Wasim.
Great. And so next up is Rob. Rob, can you hear me?
I can, Wasim. Thanks very much. So my name's Rob. I'm a research scientist at the DCI. I joined in December of 2016 to work on central bank digital currency and digital fiat currency. Prior to that, I was the manager of the digital currencies team at the Bank of England, which I did for a couple of years. I've been working on Bitcoin, I guess, or digital currency since the end of 2013. I was at the Bank of England and they put together a team to work on that. we did a couple of reports in September of 2014 that looked at the impact of the technology and the economics of Bitcoin itself. And I think what we concluded was that the technology was very promising in terms of its ability to be applied to the rest of the financial system and reform that. And I think after the crisis in 2008, I thought that, technology was part of the answer to how you would reform the financial system. And I think central bank digital currency or money, fiat money, is at really the core of the financial system. And I think if you can reform that, then that's a pathway to reforming the rest of the system. I don't think it's on its own going to achieve that goal, but I think it's part of a package of things that need to be done to reform the financial system. And I think it's good to be here at the DCI, where I can work with my colleagues, software developers. I was obviously at the central bank, and I think the strength of the DCI is we combine people with different types of expertise, so we can think about holistically about how this technology applies more broadly, as well as keeping Bitcoin going. So, Wasim, back to you.
Great, thanks, Rob. And next up is Ashley. Ashley, you there?
Hello, yes, thank you. So I'm Ashley. I'm an administrative assistant with the DCI. I've been with the group about a year and a half. I'm kind of generally the point of contact between the Media Lab and our initiative. I also coordinate travel. I look after the general day-to-day scheduling. I also monitor the finances for the team. I'm also involved in a lot of the member and funder relations. And part of my role is also to manage some of the logistics. So I do the logistics for our conference series and any other smaller events that we do have around the DCI. I maintain the website, curate the quarterly newsletter, and I generally take care of onboarding and offboarding a lot of our student researchers and contractors. So yeah, thank you.
Great, thanks, Ashley. And next is Taj. Are you there, Taj?
Yes, can you hear me okay? Cool. Okay, so yeah, I'm Taj Draja. My background's in, I guess, computer science and engineering. I got, heard of Bitcoin 2011 and started working on it, I guess, 2013, 14. And I've been at the DCI since about the same time as Rob, end of 2016, beginning of 2017. I've been working on the Lightning Network, was what I worked on initially here. I've also been working on some other things like discrete log contracts, a sort of smart contract platform you can use on top of Bitcoin. My recent and sort of current work is called U3XO, which sort of takes the state of the Bitcoin blockchain, not the blockchain itself, but the sort of end result of who owns what, and essentially uses cryptography to compress it into a much smaller state. So instead of needing a large, gigabytes size database, you can do the whole thing in under a kilobyte. So this could potentially help scale it better as well. And I will maybe talk about that a little. It's all open source. It's all public. It's on GitHub. I'm sure if you just search U3XO, you'll find it. And some people around the world are contributing to it now. So it'd be great if people want to help out as well. Cool.
Thanks, Taj. And just to say, as with U3XO and all our other projects, there's plenty of information on our website, which is dci.mit.edu. Okay, so it's over to Wasim. Hi, I'm Wasim, and I work on Cryptoeconomic Systems, which is a journal and conference series, which is in the process of spinning out as a collaboration between the MIT Media Lab and the DCI and the MIT Press. And I've been in post for about a year. And before I joined MIT, I was an independent researcher working on cryptocurrencies for a few years. And before that, I was kind of working in arts, sciences, and a whole bunch of other areas. So let me just tell you a bit about Cryptoeconomic Systems. So we're kind of, the idea is to create an interdisciplinary venue for high quality original research and reviews and surveys. That's kind of a place for rigorous and peer-reviewed original scholarly work. And so, yes, let me pass on now to Madars. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you, Wasim. I'm Madars Spirza. I'm a research scientist at the Media Lab, and I also work with the DCI. I have been at MIT for a while, as I also got my PhD from MIT under Ron Rivest. I mostly work on cryptography and specifically in ensuring privacy and integrity of computations. And more specifically, I work on things like zero-knowledge proofs and multi-party computation, and I'm building systems using those tools. And in past, it has included work on two leading zero-knowledge proof libraries, libsnark and libiop, and also ZK Ledger, a privacy-preserving system for auditing settlements on distributed ledgers. These days, I mostly work on making zero-knowledge proofs more robust, for example, reducing the trusted setup requirement, and also improving post-quantum proof systems. Back to you, Wasim.
Thanks, Madars. So we're now over to Dan C. Dan, can you hear me?
Yeah, hi. So my name is Dan Klein, and I'm a computer science student at UMass Amherst. I got involved with DCI last January, and I did a 6-month co-op with the DCI. And so there I worked on OpenCX, which is on GitHub, which is a sort of toolkit for implementing experimental features on exchanges and showing proof of concepts. And I also worked on this thing called Clockwork, which is a protocol for helping mitigate the front-running problem in exchanges. And so this uses cryptography as well. It uses what's called time lock puzzles to help achieve this. And I presented this at Stanford Blockchain Conference, so you can actually go see that on the DCI website. Should be a link to the talk and paper and whatever. Yeah, and now I work on various cryptocurrency related projects and trying to finish my undergrad.
Thanks, Dan. Now we're going to go over to Dan A. Dan, can you hear me?
Yes, hi, I'm Dan Aronoff. I've been involved, I'm a doctoral candidate in economics at MIT. I've been involved with DCI since the fall of 2018. Working on 2 projects. One is ongoing research with Dan Mraz, Neha and James Lovejoy, evaluating the resilience of proof-of-work cryptocurrencies to double spend attacks. We've published one paper, or are about to publish a paper, completed it, evaluating that problem in one particular context. I'm now working on a related context to explain how the public nature of the blockchain makes reputation building and the provision of insurance policies very feasible, which will make it possible to increase participation in cryptocurrency markets by retailers and other people that want to trade. The other part of research I'm doing involves financial markets, the repo market, and looking at smart contracts sitting on top of the blockchain being employed to improve trading outcomes by essentially setting up an offer price system within the repo market.
Thanks, Dan. And now over to James. James, can you hear me?
Yeah, thanks, Wasim. Hi, everyone. I'm James Lovejoy. I'm a master's student with the DCI. I've been working with the DCI since, I think, spring 2015 now, since my spring freshman year. I work currently on researching 51% attacks. So specifically, we built a system to track a bunch of 20 different cryptocurrencies and to figure out when 51% attacks are happening and to detect and report double spends. In the past, I've worked on things like Lightning with Taj, and also a project called CryptoKernel, which I did before, which was a sort of blockchain software development kit. And so outside the DCI, I work on a altcoin called Vercoin.
Thanks, James. And we're back over to Neha to round off.
Yeah, thanks. So James joined the DCI, I think around when I did. So he's been here the whole time. He just never went away, just kept on. So if you're an MIT student, that could be you next year, if you're interested in working with the DCI, all the way from freshman year up to MEng. So I introduced the DCI, but let me introduce myself. My name is Neha Narula. And I, like Madars, also went to grad school at MIT, so I've been here a while. And my PhD was in databases and distributed systems. I graduated in 2015. Before that, before my PhD, I worked as a software engineer at Google. But when I graduated, I I hadn't done anything in the Bitcoin space at all, anything in the cryptocurrency space, but I think 2015 was around the time that there was a lot of arguments about block size and how to scale blockchains. And I was really interested in the scalability of distributed systems. And so I started reading more about these systems, and I started learning more about how they work, and learning all about what people saw in them and what they thought they might be able to build on top of them. And that was really exciting to me. And then I also started reading about how our monetary system actually works and the history of money, and how that's evolved over time. And everything was just so fascinating. I went very deeply down a rabbit hole, which I think a lot of people do, and got super interested in the space, and then met the folks who were then working at the Digital Currency Initiative. Shout out to Jeremy Rubin, who basically taught me at least half of what I know about Bitcoin back in 2015, which was very helpful, lots of whiteboarding. And then I've been working on this ever since. And I've really enjoyed working at the DCI, and it's been really interesting to be at MIT. Some folks kind of alluded to this, but I think it's really important that we have folks who don't have a financial interest in a specific coin or token or platform winning to work in the space. So that's us at the DCI. Most of us don't have large cryptocurrency holdings. None of us advise ICOs or companies. We haven't started our own coins. And I think we've all been really deliberate about that. And we've done that on purpose because we want to be able to work on the technology and evaluate the technology from a neutral standpoint. So when we say, this is what we've chosen to work on, or this is what we think, that that's not coming from a place where we have a financial stake in the outcome of what decision you might make. And so that lets us work on things like digital fiat currency, like what Rob and I are doing. And it also lets us work on the open source cryptocurrency systems. I think something else that's a little bit unique about the DCI is if you go to our website and click our About page, you can see our values. And so the values of MIT, like the slogan is, I think it's mens et manus, which is mind and hand. So it's about obviously being intellectual and thinking with your brain and thinking through ideas, but also being very hands-on and actually building things. And so we like to do that at the DCI too. Research is not just thinking and writing papers, so that is a huge part of it. It's also writing software. And so that's why it's important that we get our hands dirty working on real world software systems. And by working on things like Bitcoin, I at least have learned a tremendous amount about how cryptocurrencies actually operate and what are some of the maybe more non-intuitive issues with them. And so that's been some of the work that I've been doing more recently with James and with Hurtyap and with Dan Aronoff, is sort of thinking about the underlying security of proof of work systems, really trying to get down into the fundamentals. And so James is wrapping up his thesis right now. It's due on Monday, and is graduating, but his work on monitoring proof of work coins, I think, is really informative, and we can't wait to share that with everybody. And we're definitely going to do a session just on proof of work security later on, which hopefully people will find interesting. So that's my introduction. Wasim, what is next? What are we doing?
Sure, we've got a couple of questions that we can roll to, some easy ones, which is always a nice place to start. I thought that you mentioned the values, so I've just brought them up on my computer, so I thought we could just mention them, which are to serve the public good, to have real-world impact, to act with integrity and rigor, to have the courage to rethink everything from the ground up, and to challenge everything and be fearless. So I think those are pretty good mottos to live by in work or in play. And so we had a question from in the YouTube from, I think it was from Viresh, and he's asking, he or she are asking, which blockchain platform is best to learn from? And we're not going to name a particular kind of cryptocurrency network which we think is interesting or compelling, but what we can do is we can refer people to all of the educational courses that we've offered at MIT over the years, which are very conveniently available in one place. If you go to our website, dci.mit.edu/courses, then you can see, like, there's a course that Risa Nehar taught on blockchain ethics last year. There's a Gary Gensler and co.'s blockchain and money course. And there's the yearly blockchain lab courses we do. And there's the course that Nehar and Taj did on cryptocurrency engineering and design. So there's a whole spectrum of materials there. They're available on the OpenCourseWare website, and the videos are also on YouTube in most of those cases. I think there's another question here about thoughts on the future of proof of stake. And I think that's an interesting one, maybe for you and for Neha and Taj to answer, given that you've been writing a paper on some interesting things around proof of stake. Taj, are you still with us? Would you like to take that?
Proof of stake, yeah. So I'm probably more of a proof of stake skeptic than the other people we're working on. It's just a very different model. And as we've done more research on, like, how these consensus mechanisms work and looking at proof of work, I think I totally understand why a lot of people dislike proof of work and think that it's, efficient or abhorrent in some way. But you really do see that you get a lot of nice properties out of it that are, and it's kind of simple in a way, where and recreating some of those properties with a system with proof of stake is often, can get complicated, but there may be ways to do it. And I don't know, I think some people might think that, might also dislike proof of stake in a sort of, quasi-religious way. So I think if we can get the same type of properties off of a system that is more efficient in some way than proof of work, that'd be great. And so it's worth looking at and understanding these systems better.
Yeah, I want to argue with Taj about something, but it's hard. Yeah, so I agree. I think that, so we obviously spend a lot of time looking at proof of work here and looking at the security of proof of work. And I think, you hear about the energy usage and your initial reaction is, oh my God, that's horrible. For some people, not everybody, that's cool. But I think it's really important that we evaluate systems in an apples to apples comparison. And I don't know that just looking at energy usage is an apples to apples comparison. We have to think about what are the actual security properties that we're getting out of these systems and what are the assumptions that we're making in these systems. And as I have dived deeper into proof of work and proof of stake, I've noticed that oftentimes, people aren't comparing these systems apples to apples at all. And there are actually some assumptions in proof of stake systems, like around key erasure, this idea that people sign a message and then immediately throw away their keys so they can't sign another message, or maybe assumptions around, that adversaries can't grind, or that they, things like that. So we've been working on a paper, I think, which is what Wasim was referring to. I don't know that I would call it a proof of stake paper. We've been working on a consensus protocol paper with a PhD student at CSEL who interned with us, and that's on archive right now if you want to check it out. And doing that project, I think, has been really interesting, trying to look at some of these problems that still exist with these systems. I mean, we've certainly seen a renaissance in consensus systems since Bitcoin and these blockchain systems came about. And that was part of what got me really interested in 2015, because as a PhD student, I knew about consensus and had read all the classic papers. And then I saw Bitcoin and I saw some of the stuff coming out, like Algorand, and I was like, whoa, this is completely different than the things that people were working on in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, which was very cool. But I do think, proof of work is incredibly elegant and incredibly simple, very elegant, very easy to sort of figure out which chain you should be on. The proof of stake and consensus protocols we've seen are a little more complex and a little harder to understand sometimes. But I think it's very important to understand all of them before you make a decision, and we shouldn't dismiss anything out of hand.
Thanks, Neha. So we have a few more questions that have come up in the chat. One good question from Pedro Torres Maki is, what are the best ways for external organizations to propose joint projects or partnerships to the DCI? And I'm going to direct you to a different page on the website this time, which is dci.mit.edu/get-involved, so get involved. And on there's information about, if we have open positions like jobs, there's opportunities for student researchers, undergraduate and grad students. There's the working groups, which are kind of temporary research organizations that DCI staff members and experts convene with partner organizations. We work with corporations and enterprises. And so if this is more regarding kind of a sponsorship, then you can reach out to us via the website. All of our contact details are there. So I've seen a bunch more questions come in, actually. finding it a bit hard to keep up.
Maybe
Yes.
could I add something to that
Sure,
as well?
go for it.
Yeah, so I think some of our most fruitful collaborations have sort of been really organic. You know, just kind of ping us and talk to us. And now that we are all trapped in our houses behind screens, we can, you know, everybody's on equal footing. So it doesn't really matter if you're thousands of miles away, aside from the time zone difference. If you want to talk about something, you know, we can set up a chat and we can talk about it. I think we've just recently gone through a lot of effort to update our website. Thanks, Ashley. And so to update all of the projects that we're working on. So that's a little bit more current now. And if you see anything that you think is interesting, or if you have feedback for us, we would love to talk to you. So.
Thanks, Neha. So yeah, questions are coming in now. There's a question here from Rohit on YouTube. What are some of the domains do you see digital currency changing for good in the near term and long term future? So have we got anyone on the call that wants to jump in here? Like I can definitely say something about what I see as kind of the opportunity for personal empowerment and for some positive kind of humanitarian gains with cryptocurrencies. Is there anybody else that wants to jump in? Rob, let's go to you.
Sure. Thanks, Wasim. Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think it'll have multiple effects across different areas of the financial system. So it could be maybe for retailers, it would decrease the costs of making transactions for them. I know that's something that retailers are interested in. I think in the financial market, so there's bits of the financial markets that most people don't really think about day to day, but I think increased competition there could certainly have a beneficial effect on end users. So I think there's a number of different effects depending on where you sit. I mean, like basically everybody uses the financial system one way or another, and I think sometimes it's difficult to detect the ways in which you're actually paying money into the financial industry. So, for example, if you go and many more people are using their cards now rather than cash when they're buying things. And when you buy something, you just pay whatever the price the store is quoted. But in that price, they are giving money to the card network, so Visa, MasterCard, whoever. And I think that as that becomes more widespread, there is a risk that it sort of evolves into sort of a private sales tax if it hasn't already, as cash sort of drops off in usage. So I think that's one thing that people should think about carefully is like, okay, how competitive is this system and how am I suffering or benefiting from that? And I think increased competition is certainly one thing that this technology can bring in.
Would anybody else like to jump in here while I scout for some more questions? So I think there's also a nice counterpoint to what Rob was saying, looking at where this all began with things like Bitcoin. So there's the potential for cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin having no central issuer and being pretty close to an ideal sense of peer-to-peer, tilting the balance of empowerment back towards the individual and the user. I think that is a nice example of how technology can be used for empowerment and for individual good. Okay, have we got any more questions? I want to hear some questions from you all.
There's one about Africa, Wasim.
Oh, yes, I missed that. Yes, so Noah asks, how can projects in Africa benefit from the work from the DCI? There is a lot of interest and conversation around blockchain, crypto assets, and new ways of trading value. How can DCI help? It's actually a shame that one of our colleagues didn't join us for the call today. So Martin is working on a project called Open Solar, which I think is like pretty closely aligned to some of the challenges that you might see, infrastructural challenges you might see in Africa. Neha, would you like to go into a bit of detail on Open Solar?
Sure. Yeah, happy to talk about it. We do research, but I think something very important to know about the DCI is we are not in a computer science research lab, nor are we in an economics department or a business school. We are kind of in a place that allows us to go where we want to go. So a lot of people here have computer science backgrounds or economics backgrounds, but we work on all sorts of things. So in addition to working on consensus protocols, I'm really fascinated in the potential applications of this technology. So, how does it interface with the needs of the real world? And so someone who used to work for the DCI, Michael Casey, who's now at CoinDesk, was really passionate about trying to figure out how to see if this technology could be helpful in creating, I guess like auditable trails. So I think the theory here is, if you create these auditable trails of data, and if you automate the way that financial transactions operate on top of that data, can you remove some of the frictions in the existing system to make investments in areas where one might have less confidence? So that's kind of the thesis behind the Open Solar project. So what happened was, this ended up becoming a project that Martine, who is at Yale, actually really jumped on, because he's very passionate about climate and climate change and natural accounting and things like that. And he's kind of just like a go and do things sort of a person. So there is a project going on, a pilot in Puerto Rico. So Martine went down to Puerto Rico and installed a bunch of solar panels on a school. So the idea here is that, after Hurricane Maria, Puerto Rico was pretty devastated, and the central power grids were actually out for over 6 months. So over 6 months, there were areas that did not have access to power. And so what were people using? They were using microgrids. They were using their cars to charge their cell phones. And so the idea here was to try to build a system to begin to test the theory that, hey, if we could build the solar microgrid, if we could hook it up to an automated system that is actually taking payments and testing to see how much electricity is being used and keeping track of everything, then can we turn that into an investable asset? So the microgrid itself becomes an automated investable asset. There are a lot of moving parts to this project, and it's pretty high risk, but I think it's very cool. I think it's a really interesting experiment, because our goal here is to kind of build these platforms that can be ultimately used for these types of use cases. So that is my summary of the Open Solar project. I will just add also, a former member of the DCI, who's now a grad student at the Media Lab working on AI and justice, the criminal justice system, Chelsea Barabbas, also has a lot of strong connections to Africa, and lived in Nairobi for a long time before she moved back to do grad school, and has definitely written some interesting things about Ponzi schemes in Africa, and also just in general, sort of the crypto world there. So.
Thanks, Neha. We're going to go over to Gertjaap, and he's going to give us a little bit of a sneak preview into one of the future streams and videos that we're going to do on the Pool Detective project. Gertjaap.
Thanks, Wasim. So we started the Pool Detective project in the summer of 2019. And the idea being that a lot of the mining capacity on cryptocurrency networks such as Bitcoin and also other proof-of-work cryptocurrencies is run through mining pools. So individual miners use mining pools to mine cryptocurrencies. And one of the potential issues there is that the mining pool has almost complete control over what the miner hardware does. And so we thought it might be interesting to position ourselves between the mining pool and the mining hardware, and see what the mining pool and the miner communicate with each other, and figure out if there's interesting patterns that we can learn about that. Because whatever the mining pool directs the miner to do, it will just do it, because most mining hardware isn't capable of understanding more deeply what the mining pool is asking them to do. And so we found some interesting things while monitoring this behavior, and we're about to publish a blog post about that, and also I'm currently recording a video series that more deeply elaborates on how this project came to be and how it works. And lastly, we're going to have an episode of this live stream where me and Neha and James are going to discuss our work around proof of work in more detail. So that's surely something to tune in for. I guess that's it for the Pool Detective.
Thanks, Gertjaap. So we've got a couple more questions that have come in on YouTube. So James asks, We'd like to hear about any work or collaborations we've got going on with regulators, policy type people, especially where regulators need some help understanding these complex technologies. So we're going to go to Rob for this.
Yeah, I think it's not just a one-way street, right? Because I think it has to work both ways, and I think one of the issues has been getting people on the technology side to understand what the sort of constraints are on the policy side, because I think that it's not really realistic to just say, for example, in relation to AML, KYC, well, just get rid of all that stuff. We need privacy, because in reality, those are legitimate public policy interests that need to be balanced. Now, I personally think that privacy is very important and needs to be preserved in any system. But the way, you have to understand what the constraints other people are under, and I think that's the value of working together. Yeah, but I think from our side, I think what we can do is, again, it's about helping the regulators understand the constraints of the technology, because I think to Nehal's point earlier about independence, I think they hear a lot from people who are trying to push a particular platform that basically everything is possible. There are no trade-offs between security and performance and all these different functionality, whereas there are. And I think our job is to explain those constraints and say, well, you have to choose between these things, and if you want this, then the effect is this. And so I think, in terms of the two-way street, I think that's what it is. It's about okay, us saying, here are the constraints of the technology, and the policymakers saying, well, here are the constraints from the sort of legal policy side, and how do you sort of, from those constraints, how do you manage a system that can be more beneficial than what we've got now?
Thanks, Rob. So we've got a question here from Istvan in Budapest, and the question is to all of us. So we'll pick a few people to respond to this, and that is which papers, works, or ideas made you the most electrified or enthusiastic in the last 1 or 2 years in the cryptocurrency literature? So I think we're going to go to Dan C first. Can you hear us, Dan?
Sorry, I think there was some confusion. Yeah. I wanted Dan to talk about the previous question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Well, why don't we let's flip back to the regulator and policy interaction question, and Dan can pick up on that.
Wait, me?
Mm-hmm.
Wait, what was the question again?
Oh,
sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
I just put Dan Klein on the spot there. Sorry. The question was about regulation, and what I was trying to say was we have some pretty cool projects going on at the DCI. One of them is Clockwork. Another one is some stuff Madars and I have been working on together, which is how to use some of this technology to enact regulation inside the system itself. But just wanted to mention it. Dan, don't want to put you on the spot. You didn't actually respond yes that you wanted to answer that question, so don't worry about it. Madars, if you want to say anything, that'd be great. Otherwise, we can move on.
Sure.
I can actually say some.
Okay, Dan, why don't you go first, then Madars. Oh. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Oh.
Yeah, so one thing about Clockwork is that it, as a protocol, it is sort of expensive because it does use these time lock puzzles. So, and what sort of we've seen with a lot of exchanges that you have all of these different features that, they potentially could implement, but maybe might not make sense, or users might not care about it. But these features provide much more safety to the user. And I think Clockwork is an example of one of those. So sort of in that way, it really helps to have some, I guess, regulatory interest in these types of, cryptographic, crypto economic systems, and because something like Clockwork may not get implemented in a real exchange if there's no regulators looking at it and saying, oh, here's some property that we might actually think is a good thing. That wouldn't happen if there weren't interest. I'm not saying that regulators are necessarily interested in Clockwork or anything. I'm just saying that that might be a reason why Clockwork is interesting.
Madars, did you want to jump in on the regulation question, or were you more interested in answering the question about favorite papers?
I wanted to speak briefly about some work we did with Neha Narula and Willie Vasquez, who's currently at UT Austin, called ZK Ledger. It's a settlement system with privacy and also auditability. Like, we know there's inherent tension between having completely private transactions and having like some sort of like global visibility in what's going on in the system. And we know that like regulators have mandate by law to monitor certain aspects of financial ecosystem. Like, we don't want one bank, for example, to hold entirety of or substantial fraction of one asset, so that it doesn't become like too fragile. On the other hand, regulators don't also want to see all the data that's happening about every single transaction, both because it's like a human right to privacy, and also regulators don't want to just like hold on to this like honeypot of data. Like, they don't want to be in the business of like seeing everything. So we have built a system called ZK Ledger, which is about settlements between banks, where regulators can ask questions about like, well, what is your exposure to this asset, or what is your liability sheet, and like they can get answers like that are tailored to what they need to know. Like, my exposure to this asset is like no more than 10% of my balance sheet, but I'm not going to tell you exactly what, and so on. And I think that like bringing advanced cryptography to regulation and audit could be a very interesting future direction. Back to you, Wasim.
Thanks, Madars. Taj, you still with us? I'm curious to hear your thoughts on papers you found interesting recently.
Papers. Okay, so a bit more than 2 years, but I really liked the Mimblewimble paper, but that might be like 3 years ago. But really interesting ideas, and we don't even another similar to the Bitcoin paper. We don't know who wrote it, but has really cool stuff going on where we can, you can figure out like how to put all this cryptography together to get really good, performance and privacy gains. Other fun papers. I can't, with the 1 or 2 year requirement, it's a little trickier. I'm thinking of a lot of papers that are a bit older. But a lot of times, I've read them in the last 1 or 2 years, but not necessarily they were written in the last 2 years. I think there's a lot of like sort of gems that should be, common knowledge and maybe aren't. There's the provisions paper by Joe Bonneau. I think Dan Bonnet was on that. So several other Stanford people. Is really cool. It shows how you can make sort of verifiable deposits and show that the exchange has all the money they say they do. Hasn't really gotten off the ground in terms of being implemented, but is a really cool idea if you're looking at that kind of thing. So I think there's a lot of papers that we all need to read, and I think one of the hard issues in this space is there's so many cool papers and we're not all aware of them. So, for example, with the MuSig paper about the sort of type of Schnorr signature aggregation that may happen in Bitcoin in the future. The authors of the paper, Peter Woola, Greg Maxwell, they wrote all this, and then so the initial reviews were, hey, you didn't see this Blair-Nevin paper from several years ago, and this is redundant, so reject. And they're like, oh, someone else wrote this, and basically, a similar thing, and we looked, but we couldn't find it just because of the different terminology. So I think there's a lot of cool papers that are, several years old that are very relevant, but are kind of hard to find and may not be as well known.
Yeah, I think I can answer this question as well, but I'm going to bend the rules a bit. So one of the things that I've been doing for cryptoeconomic systems is I'd like to have this kind of historical peer review idea or mercenary peer review idea where we can kind of go back into history or find papers from different places and take another look at those. So some very interesting papers from all kinds of places that came out longer periods of time ago, like 10, 20, even 30 years ago, that when you read them now, you can be quite shocked at how prescient and how how well they've aged. So, for example, there's a couple of papers by Eric Drexler and Mark S. Miller that in the 80s on computational marketplaces that seem to basically be laying out kind of what you see in these kind of, what the makings of blockchain-based economies or crypto economies. So I'm particularly interested in finding papers from way back and looking at how well they've aged in particular. And that Drexler Miller work is my pick. Does anybody else want to jump in on that particular question? Dan Aronoff, Dan A, can you hear me?
Yes. So there's a 2018 paper by Eric Budish that was sort of the taking off point of the research I've been doing with Neha, James, and Dan Meraz. And that is where Eric Budish is an economist at University of Chicago, demonstrated that with a liquid hash market, essentially it is relatively cheap. It is profitable to, the minimum transaction size above which it's profitable to launch a double spend attack is relatively low, you could say. And that was our taking off point to look at, because prior to that time, it had been thought that what all this investment in computing power and energy consumption did in Bitcoin was to bring you security against a double spend attack, the idea being that it would be prohibitively expensive to launch the attack. Budish knocked that down. Recently, we worked out that the situation on that dimension is even more dire than what Budish said, that essentially under those conditions, it's costless, it's free to launch an attack. But what we've done, based on that in our work, is look at another dimension of the technology and the actions that people can take to show that in fact the system has stability properties, but from an entirely different place. But Budish really opened up this issue of, demonstrating that at least as thought up to that time, the system was vulnerable to double spend attacks, and that all of this investment in computing power brought you essentially no security, that along that dimension, it didn't deliver.
Thanks, Dan. So Rob is going to answer the question about interesting papers from the past few years now.
Sure, thanks, Wasim. So I was going to nominate scriptless scripts, which I sort of started looking into last year because I was thinking about this concept of how is programmability going to work in a central bank digital currency. And I think one of the important things is that CBDC should be a very simple system, as simple as possible, and bearing in mind, to get the benefits, competition benefits that I described earlier. So how should the scripting mechanism work? And I was talking to one of my DCI colleagues, and they introduced me to this paper, which I thought was very interesting.
Thanks, Rob. So we're coming to the finishing stages of the live stream now, and there's a nice question here from CK Alvin, who I think is an anagram of somebody we might know. And that question is, how far does DCI take in implementation of research going on? In other words, at what point and how does the DCI decide to archive a research project and move on to something else? And this is actually quite a good point on kind of research life cycles inside and outside universities. And we're going to go over to Neha to answer that question.
Great. Thanks, Wasim. I'll answer this question. So this is pretty challenging, actually. So we are all researchers who work at a university. We aren't running a company and we don't have a profit motive. We don't have UI designers or UX people or product managers. And I think we have a relatively small number of engineers. So we're not really set up to build and ship products at the DCI. That said, it's kind of amazing in this space, especially what has just come out of random groups of people who are really passionate about working on things. So I think that this is something that I personally struggle with a lot, which is how far do we take things? When is the right point to just put out something that we've been working on for a while and see if anybody else is interested or not? And so I think that's different for different projects. Some of us are more in the earlier life cycle of coming up with ideas and writing papers and having that be, and building a prototype and evaluating it, but sort of having that be the endpoint. And then some folks are more interested in working with companies, working with third parties, regulators, governments, et cetera, to try to do pilots. And some just want to put out open source software. I think we all want our work to be used as much as possible. And the question is, sort of given the limited resources we have here at the DCI, how do we balance the effort it takes to get something to production ready versus, you know, the limited resources we have? I'll also add something that's really important to me is I don't want to put out software that has bugs in it that people are going to use and that where they might lose money. So I want to make sure that anything we do put out has the appropriate warning labels on it. We're not encouraging people to use it irresponsibly. And I want to be really careful about what we say about what we're doing and what stage it's at and how much we recommend people using it or not. So that's something that's really important to me. I'll also add just really quick, I thought of an answer to the previous question, which I want to answer. I think the first financial crypto I went to, Sean Bowe demoed a zero knowledge contingent payment with Greg Maxwell. And I still think zero knowledge contingent payments are so incredibly cool that we can make payments contingent on a program and the answer to a program. And I think that it keeps coming up over and over again with different use cases about how one might embed that functionality, just that simple functionality, into different workflows. So I think that's a really cool thing. And so now I think we're going to wrap up. Is that right, Wasim? Do you want to wrap us up?
Yeah, that's it, Nihal. We're done here. So thanks everybody for watching. Thanks to all of our DCI team and family for calling in from all over the place, from wherever everybody is. So yeah, thank you for watching. Thanks for participating. Please visit our website, dci.mit.edu. And wherever you're watching this, please remember to like, share, and subscribe. And follow us on Twitter at MIT-DCI, and we'll be letting you know about the details of forthcoming ones in the series here. So it's goodbye from us, and we're going to give you a wave, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.